Welcome in again to the Mason Talk Sports Show. Today is Thursday, June 17th, 2021, and today I have a lot of stuff that I want to talk about involving the National Football League. Now, we are going to have a relatively quarterback heavy show today. There are some people who believe that Baker Mayfield should be in the MVP conversation. Today, I want to look at if that's realistic. And then after that, later in the show, I want to talk about the quarterback situation of a different team, specifically the Pittsburgh Steelers. But before we get too deep into the quarterback philosophy, I want to look at the Browns defense, specifically a certain player by the name of Jadeveon Clowney. Now, Jadeveon Clowney was one of the sort of bigger name additions of the Browns offseason. He definitely was one of the more interesting free agent signings. And the main reason being is because, as we all know, dude's got a ton of potential. He was the first overall pick by the Houston Texans a few years ago. He's got the athletic traits. He's got the size. He's got the skill to be a good pass rusher in the National Football League. The big question is, number one, can he stay healthy? Number two, can he stay motivated? So bringing him into this defensive line obviously was an interesting move by Andrew Berry. Brown's mandatory minicamp has been going on for the past few days, and you have all sorts of veteran players at Berea, including Jadeveon Clowney. And so far, what we've heard is that Clowney has looked pretty good. He's looked fast. He hasn't looked like his injury or surgery have been hampering him really in any way. And that is a positive thing for the Cleveland Browns. But today, I kind of wanted to consider the question of what role will Jadeveon Clowney play for the Cleveland Browns? Because when you look at the defense that the Browns have assembled, and when you look at the type of players that they have filled that unit with, I think there are three distinct roles that pretty much every player falls into. Now, the first two roles are relatively obvious because really they are in every sport on every team. Number one, you've got the stars. And when I look at this Browns defense, I see three star players. Number one is Myles Garrett. And that obviously, that's a no-brainer. Myles Garrett, great player. And he's going to be defensive player of the year at some point in his career. I can almost guarantee it. He is the backbone of this Browns defense. And if he didn't get the coronavirus last year, he probably would have been defensive player of the year. Myles Garrett is a star. The second star is also pretty close to undebatable, and that's Denzel Ward. Now, Denzel Ward, the big question with him has been injuries, but when Denzel Ward is on the field, he's one of the best cornerbacks in the entire National Football League. That's why Ward is set to make somewhere like $18 million a year, some crazy, audacious number like that. The third player who I would put in the star category, and this is the last star that I think we have on our defense, this is really the only debatable one, is safety John Johnson III. Now, the only reason why this one is kind of questionable is because we haven't seen what John Johnson's going to be for the Browns. He has spent his career with the Los Angeles Rams, where he was one of the best safeties in all of football. And if those skills can translate to the Browns, he'll be a star. The other role outside of star, the one that every team has, are role players. Every team has role players. These are the veterans who are good, not great. They're not terrible. You can rely on them, but they're not going to necessarily be game-changing. And when I look at the Browns roster, I see quite a few defensive players who I would consider to be role players. I think some of them are Anthony Walker. He's going to be a good veteran linebacker, but he's not going to be a star or anything of that magnitude. Malik Jackson, defensive tackle, similar sort of, ability level there. Troy Hill at cornerback could be better than your average role player, but I think he kind of fits into that category, as do guys like Tack McKinley and Ronnie Harrison. But the third category of player, which I think is definitely the sort of make or break category in terms of talent on your defense, are the swingmen. These are the players who will either make or break your defense, as I just alluded to before. If these players are great, your defense has the potential to be special. If they're terrible, your defense has the potential to be terrible. It's just that's kind of how it is. They're like the J.R. Smith of players on your defense. They're either going to be, hitting 8 threes in a playoff game or, grabbing a rebound on a free throw and running away. And when I think of swingmen on this Browns defense, the players who immediately came to mind, number one, was Jadeveon Clowney. Because if Jadeveon Clowney is great, the Browns defense is going to be great. And that is something that Clowney kind of alluded to in his media availability today, or yesterday, actually. He said that this Browns defense reminds him of the 49ers Super Bowl unit defense, which, of course, back a couple years ago, I think it was 2 years ago, 3 years ago, when the 49ers played the Chiefs in the Super Bowl. They didn't get there because of Jimmy Garoppolo. They didn't get there because of their offense. They got there because their defense was absurd. And Clowney drew that comparison. He said, this Browns defense has similarities to that 49ers unit. And I don't think the Browns defense is going to be the type to carry a team to literally the Super Bowl, but I think their defense can be good if guys like Jadeveon Clowney reach their full potential. I think other players who sort of fit that swingman role, Grant Delpit, because Grant Delpit had a ton of potential coming out of LSU. So if he's able to rehab from that Achilles injury, he still could be great. Greg Newsome, if Greg Newsome's great, the Browns secondary is going to be just a complete annoyance to play against for any other team. Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, they're needless to explain there. The reason the Browns drafted him was because of that potential, because of that versatility. Those are the players who I think make or break the Browns defense, those swingmen. So if Jadeveon Clowney can fit into that role and play as the high end of a swingman, if he can reach his full potential and be an absolute beast on the opposite side of the defensive line to Myles Garrett, then I would have to agree with Clowney in his statement that the Browns could have a dominating defense. But that's the role he's got to fill. He's a make or break player. Similarly to how Olivier Vernon at times when he was on the field healthy was making plays and the Browns defense was significantly better because of it. That's the role Jadeveon Clowney is going to play. He plays an important role. So that's definitely going to be something to watch in training camp and the preseason. How did Jadeveon Clowney play? Now, I want to move on from defense and get to what I alluded to earlier, and that was Baker's MVP talk, because this was really a wild story. Now, gambling. Everybody knows gambling, right? Come on, it's when you place money. I don't know why I'm explaining gambling. So, according to William Hill, U.S., Browns quarterback Baker Mayfield has had the most money wagered on him to win the 2020 MVP award of any player. And that's interesting because Baker Mayfield has had an up and down career at the National Football League level. He was great as a rookie, and then everybody thought he was going to be in the MVP conversation year 2. Clearly didn't happen. And then after last year, Baker had a sort of average. I mean, he wasn't average, but he definitely had a better year, but not an MVP level year. So the fact that people are so confident about Baker Mayfield being potentially an MVP level quarterback, I think it's interesting. And I think that when you look at MVPs over the last few years, especially the last 3 years, I think they all have 3 traits in common. And if Baker is going to be the MVP, he has to have these same 3 traits. Number 1, and this is almost most important at this point, you have to be a quarterback. You have to be a quarterback to it. And I know that Adrian Peterson won MVP, but if you want to be the MVP of the National Football League, you have to be a quarterback. It's a quarterback league. Quarterbacks win the award, 99% of the time. You have to be a quarterback. So check that off the list of requirements. Baker Mayfield is a quarterback. The second thing that every MVP has in common, their team wins. Their team is successful. And I think this is another thing that you can sort of check, add to the checklist for Baker Mayfield. The Browns won 11 games last year. They went 11-5. I think the Browns are going to have the potential to put up a similar record this year. I don't know if they're going to necessarily go 11-6, but I think you could see them get into that sort of 13 win range. I think the Browns are going to be successful, so you can add that to his potential MVP resume. Not only is he a quarterback, but he also has had success. But then the third thing, the interesting sort of variable in this conversation, is that every MVP, especially the MVPs from the past 3 seasons, have put up audacious numbers, not just good numbers, not just, really good numbers at the NFL level. No, the past 3 MVPs and basically every MVP in the history of the league have put up legendary numbers. Last year, Aaron Rodgers of the Green Bay Packers won the MVP award. Aaron Rodgers threw 48 touchdown passes. 48. The year before that, Lamar Jackson won the award. He threw 36 touchdown passes, which is a ton for a player who isn't even necessarily known as a pure passing quarterback. But outside of those 36 touchdown passes, as we all know, Lamar Jackson also ran for over 1,200 yards. That's big time for a quarterback. And then the year before that, 2018, Patrick Mahomes threw 50 touchdown passes. So when you look at MVPs and when you consider what you have to do to be an MVP, you have to have at least one truly audacious stat. Rodgers threw 48 touchdown passes. Lamar Jackson ran for over 1,200 yards as a quarterback, running back hybrid, whatever you want to look at him as. And Patrick Mahomes threw 50 touchdown passes. The big question for Baker Mayfield, I don't think it's going to be about winning. I don't think it's going to be about his position. The big question for Baker Mayfield, can he put up some sort of audacious stat? Because if he can't, he's not going to be MVP. If Baker doesn't throw for over 45 touchdown passes, he's not going to be MVP. If Baker doesn't put up, Drew Brees level passing yard stats, he's not going to be MVP. And I think that that's really where this sort of, hitch in this conversation comes. I don't think Baker's going to put up those type of numbers because he doesn't need to for the Browns to win. When you look at last year's NFL season, one of the weird storylines right out the gates was the fact that Ryan Tannehill was in the MVP conversation. Remember how weird that was? Ryan Tannehill was in the running for MVP early on in the season because he was putting up really good numbers and the Tennessee Titans were winning football games. That all ended because the Tennessee Titans eventually shifted into a heavy run game focused offense, and Derrick Henry became the true sort of bell cow player for that Titans team. And, if Tannehill had consistently put up numbers like he did early in the season all year, he would have stuck in that MVP conversation. He may have even won the award, but he didn't because his team had Derrick Henry and they used him accordingly. I think that something similar will happen with Baker Mayfield. Baker might put up good, numbers. He might consistently be a very good quarterback, but the Browns are going to have Nick Chubb. The Browns are going to have Kareem Hunt. The Browns are going to have a run-heavy offense. And as long as you have an offense that focuses heavily on running the football, even if you win games, it's not going to be enough to put you in that MVP conversation. You're not going to be putting up 40, 50 touchdown passes when you're handing the ball to Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt a lot. That's not a bad thing for the Cleveland Browns. Winning football games is not a bad thing for the Cleveland Browns. I'm just pointing to the fact that I would say it's likely that Baker is not going to be in the MVP conversation. He might at some point in his career, like let's say down the road, if the Browns decide that contractually they can't keep Nick Chubb, it just would be too hard in the salary cap. Looking at salary cap numbers, it would be too difficult to keep Nick Chubb. If the Browns move on from Nick Chubb and Baker starts putting up big time numbers and the Browns keep winning and it goes more on the back of Baker Mayfield, then yeah, maybe at some point in his career he could be MVP. But I think that this year, with all the talent you have, especially in your running back room, I think it's unlikely Baker Mayfield is going to be able to put up literal, MVP level stats. Now, the last thing I want to talk about, and this is I guess it's kind of a funny story. The Pittsburgh Steelers have also been, doing their mandatory camps. And a player who I literally forgot was not only on the Steelers, but a player who I forgot was in the league was quarterback Dwayne Haskins. Now, this was a hilarious quote, to me at least. It might not be funny to anybody else, but it was hilarious to me. Haskins told the media, just coming here to Pittsburgh, I just wanted to the coaching staff and my teammates how much I love football. Now, I don't think it's ever good when your quarterback. Now, let me frame this properly. Your quarterback is the leader of your team. You get behind your quarterback and you follow your quarterback's lead. That's generally how it is in the National Football League. He's the leader of your team. He's the guy you're supposed to be sort of following as almost a role model. When your quarterback, one of your quarterbacks, he's not the top guy, obviously, but when one of your quarterbacks in Dwayne Haskins, who the Steelers view as a potential replacement for Ben Roethlisberger, says that he had to prove that he loved football, that's a bad sign. I think it's hilarious because it's not my quarterback. It's not my problem. But I think it's hilarious that Dwayne Haskins has to prove to his team that he loves football. And it points to a really interesting future scenario that the Steelers are going to have to deal with. Because as we all know, Ben Roethlisberger ain't getting any younger. In fact, I would say he's aging at a high rate. He's aging just about as fast as anybody in human history. Ben Roethlisberger could be done after this season. I leave it at could, an open-ended scenario, because you never know. I think the Steelers really wanted him to leave this year, but he decided not to. But you're going to have to start considering a future in which you don't have Ben Roethlisberger. And I think the Steelers are going to have a really hard time in that sort of transition from Ben Roethlisberger to the future. I think the Steelers are going to really, really, really struggle at finding their next quarterback because I don't think they're going to be bad enough. And at the NFL level, when you're looking for a quarterback, the first thing you need to do is be bad. Because in reality, the best of the best go in the top 5. The best of the best of the best go in the top 3. And I think that the Steelers, being a proud organization, being an organization that hasn't gone worse than 7-9 since like 1975, the Steelers being a proud organization and an organization that is so just, focused on winning and always has won and always, will continue to win. I think the Steelers are going to have a hard time losing. And that could restrict them from finding a future franchise quarterback. I look at it sort of as the Indianapolis Colts conundrum. Because when you look at the Indianapolis Colts, they have a roster of talent that is right up there in terms of talent with everybody else in the National Football League. The Indianapolis Colts roster is great, but they haven't had postseason success recently because their quarterback situation's been up and down. Their quarterback situation has been rocky. Andrew Luck retired, and that threw a wrench into everything. Jacoby Brissett was fine. Obviously not good enough to win you playoff games. Phillip Rivers was good, but Phillip Rivers was also super old. The Colts are now on to Carson Wentz, and if Carson Wentz is average, if Carson Wentz was the same Carson Wentz that we saw last year, the Colts aren't going to be doing anything in the playoffs yet again. The Colts are good. They have a very good roster, and they're good enough to win football games, but they're not good enough to win playoff games. They're kind of stuck in the middle. They're not bad enough to get a franchise quarterback. They're not good enough to win playoff games. I think we could see the Steelers fall into that same category. Because when you look at the games that they've played without Ben Roethlisberger in recent years, the Steelers have a talented team. They have a very good coaching staff. And even when they had to put Mason Rudolph on the field, they weren't that bad. The Steelers really weren't that bad. They weren't great, but they weren't that bad. And I think that the Steelers could fall into that sort of middle ground where you get stuck between the past and the future. And if that were to happen, and the Steelers got stuck in a perpetual cycle of 7-9, 8-8, 9-7, that would be one of the best things to ever happen to the Cleveland Browns. Because then your only focus in terms of winning the AFC North would be the Baltimore Ravens. Because I don't fear the Cincinnati Bengals. I have no fear of Cincinnati. I know they have Joe Burrow, but I have no fear of the Bengals because I don't think they can build around him at all. If the Bengals were serious about building around Joe Burrow, they would have drafted that offensive lineman who now I can't think of his name. That dude who the Lions took. I can't think of his name. They would, if they were serious about Joe Burrow, they would have taken an offensive lineman in the first round. And because of that, the AFC North is ripe for the picking for the Cleveland Browns. The Bengals are bad, the Steelers are bad. The Steelers will never have a quarterback again. You know what I'm talking about. But yeah, that's it. This has been the Mason Talks Sports Show. If you like what you saw, make sure to leave a like. Make sure to subscribe. Make sure to share it on social media, all that stuff. Thank you for tuning in to the Mason Talks Sports Show. I will see you in my next episode. Goodbye.